Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be doing a Special Booster 1.5 red budget deck, and this red budget deck is solely focused on upgrading the red starter deck. So going over the deck, starting with the Digitama, I'm going to be running one copy of Gigimon. So this could really be any Digitama you feel like utilizing. I just feel like compared to all of the Digitama we have available, Gigimon is definitely one of the best red Digitama we could be playing around with, just because he has this really nice inheritable ability where during your turn, while there are 5 or more cards in your opponent's trash, then this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. So DP boosting is generally something red really likes doing, so that way they can ensure that their Digimon are going to be stronger than the opponent's Digimon. So Gigimon being one of the best DP boosters definitely means that we should be running him. But the main Digitama of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Koromon. So this version of Koromon comes in the starter deck, and he is still pretty decent just because he's still DP boosting, which is what we're really looking to gain out of the card. And even though Koromon is only really going to be affecting the Mega level Digimon, that's really the only level we need the DP boost on. So it's okay that we're not going to be getting it all the time. So Koromon's inheritable abilities during your turn, while this Digimon has 4 or more cards in its Digivolution source, then it gets plus 1000 DP. So again, just a solid way to DP boost, and it's low investment because you would have already had the red starter deck. Next, on to the rookies, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Guilmon. So Guilmon is in here just because he's a really decent red Digimon with a solid inheritable ability. So his inheritable ability is the exact same thing as Gigimon's, where during your turn, while the opponent has 5 or more cards in their trash, then this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. And again, red likes its DP boosts, so it only makes sense that we would run Guilmon. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Biyomon. So Biyomon is a pretty decent Digimon just because this version of Biyomon is actually a really aggressive card despite having some low DP, so we don't necessarily care whether this card lives or dies. The whole point is to try to utilize this card to swing into the opponent's security to get its on-delete ability. So what its on-delete ability is during your turn, you get to gain 1 memory. So yes, this doesn't trigger on the opponent's turn, but the whole idea, like I said, is to utilize this card aggressively to swing at the opponent's security and to try to have them either A, bait out a blocker, or B, hit their security and have Biyomon die, so that way you could gain the 1 memory to extend a lot of your plays and make a lot more powerful plays as a result. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Biyomon. So this Biyomon is from the starter deck, and this is just your value-efficient vanilla card, where it just has a really low play cost, it has a really low evo cost, and it has some decent DP for being a rookie, so that just makes it a good card to want to run. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Agumon. So this Agumon comes from the red starter deck, and it has a very powerful ability that's similar to Guilmon and Koromon and Gigimon, where it just boosts our Digimon's DP by 1000, but the big difference between this versus all of the other cards is this doesn't have a condition, and it's just a solid flat boost of 1000 DP during your turn. So it's just a very easy way to DP boost our Digimon, and as I mentioned before, that's just something we want to do. Next, on to the champions, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Greymon. So this Greymon has a really powerful inheritable ability that's very similar to the Agumon's, where during your turn, this Digimon gets plus 2000 DP. So obviously, we could stack this up with some of our other buffs to continuously DP boost our Digimon to make our higher levels that much more stronger than the opponents. So this is just fitting that same exact role that Agumon was doing in Guilmon, Gigimon, and Koromon, where the whole idea is just to DP boost our Digimon, and the sizable buff of 2000 stacked with everything else just makes it a pretty decent card to want to run. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of DarkTyrannomon. So DarkTyrannomon is really only in here for one big reason, and that's the fact that he has this really low evo cost of 1, so we could utilize this evo cost to act as a good stepping stone to get into our higher stages with it that much more faster and that much more efficiently with. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Coredramon. So Coredramon is in here just because this is the dedicated blocker of the deck, and having some form of defense is still really important, so that's why we're running Coredramon. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Greymon. So this Greymon comes from the starter deck, and this Greymon is pretty decent because it has a really powerful inheritable ability of giving our higher levels security attack +1, so that way we could pressure the opponent's security with when they're attacking for more damage. So ordinarily, I would probably want to run 4 of this Greymon and cut the other Greymon, but I built this deck under the assumption that you're only able to get 1 copy of the red starter deck, so that's the only real reason why I'm running 2. But I do also like the fact that you have some different abilities, so that way you can kind of choose how you want to customize your Digimon when you're digivolving up into your higher stages. Next, on to the ultimates, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Groundramon. So Groundramon is a pretty decent card just because it's another value-efficient vanilla card, where you're just utilizing the card for its low play cost and low evo cost compared to a lot of other Digimon in its level. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Lavogaritamon. So Lavogaritamon is another value-efficient vanilla card, except this time it has stats that are similar to DarkTyrannomon, where we're really just utilizing it for the fact that it has a low evo cost, and on top of which, similar to DarkTyrannomon, it also has some slightly higher DP than a lot of the other Digimon in its level, so that way if we feel like we need to utilize this card to aggress with, we're more than welcome to do so, especially since we have a whole bunch of DP boosts. We can make this number even higher, making it hit even harder on a lower level, so that's just another really good aspect on how you could utilize the card. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Metal Greymon. So this is the starter deck Metal Greymon, and we're really only utilizing this card for its inheritable ability, where during your turn, when this Digimon is blocked, then you get to gain 3 memory. So the big theme on how Red wants to be played is to hit the opponent's security really, really hard, and it incentivizes the opponent to want to block, otherwise they're just going to lose a lot of their security. So when they block with Metal Greymon underneath, gaining the 3 memory is really good because then it could extend some of your plays to make even more powerful plays happen. Next, onto the Megas, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Phoenixmon. So this version of Phoenixmon is really nice because it has a really good when attacking ability, where when this Digimon is attacking a player or their security, then you get to gain 1 memory. So as I mentioned before on all of the other cards that are gaining memory is really, really nice because it could extend some of your plays and allow you to make more powerful plays. So the fact that we have a Mega that could just help us gain some additional memory to do that is really, really nice, especially since we can make this Mega relatively large and relatively powerful with all of our inheritable abilities. And then the really good thing about this ability is the fact that it is a when attacking ability, so that way even if they block, as long as you declared the attack was going onto their security, then you're still going to be gaining the memory. So we could just utilize this card in some very different ways to just try to gain us some additional memory to make more powerful plays happen. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Phoenixmon. So this Phoenixmon comes from the starter deck, and this Phoenixmon, similar to Lavogaritamon and DarkTyrannomon, is just a really good efficiency vanilla Mega, where we're really just utilizing it for the fact that it has a low evo cost, so that way we could tempo into this card very efficiently, and then we just have a Mega just sitting on the board to constantly act as good pressure onto the opponent. And then on top of its low evo cost, it also has some relatively high DP, so they might not be able to clear it as efficiently as some of the others. And it's just a really good card to just throw onto the field and start aggressing onto the opponent with. And then the last Mega of the deck is going to be 4 copies of War Greymon. So I do understand that the starter deck only comes with 2 copies, so you do have to get 2 copies elsewhere, and thankfully he's not that expensive of a card to pick up, or you could just play 2 of a different Mega and it's totally okay. But I really like this War Greymon because he has a really powerful ability where during your turn, for every 2 evolution sources in this Digimon, then he gains security attack +1. So that means a fully built up and a fully evolved War Greymon will have 4 evolution sources under him, which means he'll have security attack +2, which means when he attacks the opponent, he's going to be doing at least 3 security checks, and that's really, really powerful, especially if you have him stacked with some really good abilities to make it so that he could live through those security checks, means that he's just a really powerful Digimon to be playing around with, and he can present a lot of pressure onto the opponent. The only downside to the card is the fact that he has a evo cost of 4, but that's why we're kind of playing with a whole bunch of ways of gaining memory, so that way we could try to mitigate the fact that he has a slightly higher evo cost than some of our other megas. But he's still a very powerful Digimon to be playing around with, and I definitely really like what this card is doing. Next, onto the option cards, I'm going to be running 2 copies of A Delicate Plan. So A Delicate Plan is a pretty good option card for the style of deck because obviously the main goal of having our War Greymon be the main mega is to try to hit multiple security checks, and we definitely don't want our mega to be deleted during any of those security checks. So that's why we're running a whole bunch of DP boosts so that way he could clear over him, and that's why we definitely want to run a card like A Delicate Plan so that way we can have a very powerful and a very safe swing turn, because what A Delicate Plan is doing is it gives one of the Digimon on the field the ability where it doesn't activate the security effect of option cards in the opponent's security. So that means that we could safely swing with our War Greymon to bust all of the opponent's security, and with this card's ability active on him, then they won't get any of the security abilities off of their option cards, thus increasing our overall damage output and success rate of the swing. And then on top of that, this card has the security ability of being able to add itself to our hand, so we could figure out when we want to utilize this card. And then the last option of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Gaia Force. So the starter deck, again, only comes with 2 copies of Gaia Force. Otherwise, I would probably recommend running more. But the fact that we still get Gaia Force in the red starter deck is really nice because this card is really, really powerful with the main ability of just being able to delete one of the opponent's Digimon outright. So that's just really, really powerful, and then on top of which it has a really powerful security ability of activating its main effect, so that way you're always going to be able to delete one of the opponent's Digimon when you see this card. And then the only tamer of the deck is going to be 2 copies of the starter deck Taikamiya. So this is really good because it's a very efficient tamer card to run because it has a low play cost, and then on top of which it has a really nice passive ability where during your turn, all of your Digimon get plus 1000 DP. So he's kind of fitting in with the theme of just making sure that our Digimon's DP is as high as possible, and he does stack, so if you have multiple ties out, then you get multiple instances of this ability, thus making your Digimon that much stronger. So this is just a really solid tamer to be playing with, especially since he's fitting on theme. And then there's just a whole bunch of other cards that you could play with this deck, both on a budget and off of a budget. So on a budget, here's some really good cards that you could think about possibly running. So if you wanted to, you could utilize this Agumon to help dig out your tamers if you're playing more tamers or want to see your tamers more often. You could play this version of Greymon because he is a security Digimon, so when he's checked in the security, he is another body on board. You could run Skull Greymon just because Skull Greymon has a really powerful on-play ability of deleting one of the opponent's Digimon with blocker. You could run War Growlmon because he has this really good when Digivolving ability where if you have a red tamer in play, then you get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 3000 DP or less, so you get a little bit of extra control out of him, and then on top of which he has a good inheritable ability that's basically the same thing as Gigimon and Guilmon's, where he just DP boosts by 1000 if the opponent has 5 or more cards in their trash, so he's just decent overall. You could think about playing Breakerdramon just because Breakerdramon is another mega that has a good ability of piercing, so that way whether they block or they don't block, you're always going to be able to deal security damage with Breakerdramon. And then you could also think about running Volcanicdramon just because Volcanicdramon naturally has security attack +1, so if you need to evo up into Volcanicdramon just for that security attack +1, then that's still pretty good, but on top of that, you also have the availability of its on-play ability to delete all of the opponent's Digimon with 4000 DP or less, so you get the flexibility on how you want to utilize the card there. You could also think about playing Gravity Crush as just a way to borrow memory, so you do have to give the 2 memory back, but the fact that you could just 4-0 gain 2 memory is still really, really powerful. If you want some alternate removal options, then you could think about running Shield of the Just, where it deletes one of the opponent's Digimon with 5000 DP, and then if you have a red tamer in play, then it can delete one with 8000 DP or less instead. And then if you're really afraid of the opponent's Digimon being really, really strong, then you could always think about running Plasma Stake as another removal option card, just because it allows you to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 13,000 or more DP. Most Digimon right now don't have 13,000 or more, unless they're swinging with some buffs, so you do have to take that into consideration. But the fact that it still can deal with some level 7s as a really good budget card is definitely really nice, and then it has the security ability of activating its main effect, where that's really where this card is going to shine, just because most of the time they're going to have some form of DP boost on their Digimon, which means if they're on their Mega level, they could easily hit over 13, which makes this card even more dangerous in the security. And then a really cheap tamer that you could think about picking up is going to be Sora, just because Sora is another tamer that is DP boosting your Digimon, except she's only DP boosting one red Digimon by 2,000 instead of Tai, which is boosting all of your Digimon by 1,000. So there's some trade-offs on some of the DP boosting tamers you want to run, if you want to run any. And then going off budget, there's just a whole bunch of powerful cards you could change, add, or replace in the deck to make it even more powerful. So you have access to Agumon for just more Greymon synergy and more Greymon support. You have Garudamon, which has piercing and can help you draw cards if the opponent is going to be blocking your Digimon. Then you have Metal Greymon, which if you really need to utilize him for his security tech +2, you could, with the downside of losing 5 memory, but most of the time you're just going to be running him for his sizable DP boost as an inheritable skill. You could play this version of War Greymon because he basically has a delicate plan built into him, so it makes it easier for this War Greymon to aggress safer. Even though his damage output is going to be a little bit lower, you could still do some very devastating damage with him. You could also think about changing up the deck to incorporate Guilmon and a lot of his support more. Then you could think about utilizing Blitz Greymon just because he naturally has the piercing ability, so if you want to play more into the piercers, then you're more than welcome to do so. But he also has a really good when digivolving ability to de-digivolve 2 on one of the opponent's Digimon, so it's a really good anti-tempo ability. If you want a really cheap level 7 just to play, or if you want to play around with his support, then Ragnarlordmon is a really good level 7 that you could be playing around with. And then because you're red, you have access to Omnimon. So Omnimon's really good for his multi-swinging, especially if you pair him up with a security attack +1 in his inheritables. Then that one turn he could swing for basically 4 security. And then he also has a really powerful removal ability on his when Digivolve, making him just an absolute monster of a card to try to deal with. And then similar to Omnimon, you have Omnimon Alter S, where they're doing very similar things. Instead of the multi-attacking, this becomes unblockable, and instead of the hard removal, this is more of a board wipe. And then you have access to the red Taikimiya that could help with your overall damage output because he is a memory fixing tamer, so he's always going to make sure that you're at 3 memory. And then on top of that, he also gives all of your red Digimon with 4 more Digivolution sources security attack +1. So paired up with the starter deck War Greymon, he could hit for even more security, and then if you have any security attack +1s in his inheritable, then you could just easily bust for all 5 of the opponent's security in one turn, and that's just really powerful. So there's just a whole bunch of different things that you could do with the deck to try to change and customize it to fit more of your needs, depending on what your budget is and what cards you want to run. But I just think this is a really good foundation for what a lot of red decks generally like to be doing, and I think this is a pretty fun and interesting red deck, considering it is just a classical take on what red is doing. So that's all I really have for this deck. As always, I'll have the deck list down in the description below, and feel free to tell me your thoughts about the deck down in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.